Duyun hit the floor of the chapel-turned-auction hall like a man whose strings had been cut all at once, champagne. Glass shattering against the stone near the north wall. 40 guests froze. Vivienne Marsh was already moving. Before anyone else's chair had scraped back, she crossed the room and dropped to her knees beside him, 2 fingers pressed to his throat, counting. "Call an ambulance. Now," she said, calm enough to cut through the panic. "Tell them thallium poisoning. Say it exactly like that." Hannah Co stood 3 feet away, hand over her mouth, and said nothing about the word Vivienne had just spoken aloud in front of the wealthiest people on Jeju Island. 18 days earlier, none of them had known her name. If you've ever been the most capable person in a room and the last person anyone thought to ask, stay with this one. What Vivienne survives over the next 18 days will cost her everything she rebuilt after the army, and it begins with a job she almost didn't take. 18 days earlier, Vivienne stood at the base of a stone driveway overlooking the sea, holding a resume that read private catering, field medical experience, and omitted almost everything that mattered. The estate manager, Ansel, studied her with practiced skepticism. "Bexol doesn't usually interview candidates without formal culinary credentials." "I don't have formal credentials," Vivienne replied. "I have 11 years feeding people who couldn't afford to get sick, and 4 years feeding a 12-year-old on a single income. I know how to cook for someone whose body doesn't have room for error." That earned her the first flicker of respect she'd seen from him all day. She hadn't wanted to come to Korea. Since her husband's ordinary, meaningless highway death, she'd been moving through life on momentum more than desire. She had left the army months earlier, carrying a decision from a field hospital that still woke her at night. Cooking was the only thing that made her hands feel steady again. The tuition notice for her son, Theo, buzzed in her pocket as Ansel led her toward the house. She silenced it without looking. This job paid enough to matter. The kitchen surprised her, glass walls, herbs growing in sunlight, the sea spread below the cliffs. She was still taking it in when a man entered without announcement. He didn't look like wealth. No entourage. No display. Just a tired precision in the way he moved, one hand briefly pressing his ribs as though hiding discomfort. "You're the new chef," he said. "I haven't been hired yet." "You will be." He studied her a moment longer. "Ansel doesn't walk people up here unless he's already decided. He just enjoys making them wait." On the wall behind him hung a landscape painting a few degrees off-center. Vivienne noticed. She said nothing. By the end of the afternoon she had a signed contract, a salary large enough to keep Theo in school, and a strict list of foods Kang Duyun's doctors had forbidden because of what they called unexplained gastric sensitivity. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that his sensitivity already had a name. And someone in that house was giving it to him one careful spoonful at a time. Bexol estate ran with military precision, and Vivienne learned its rhythm the way she once learned forward operating bases, by watching instead of asking. Breakfast was always at 7. Duyun's schedule was guarded by Ansel with almost obsessive care. And every afternoon, precisely at 4, Hannah Co arrived carrying a small lacquered box that never left her hands until she placed it in front of Duyun. The family tonic, Hannah explained warmly the first time they met. His mother's recipe. Herbs, roots, a few things only I prepare. He refuses half the medicine his doctors prescribe, but he'll always take this. I can make it if it would help, Vivienne offered. Hannah smiled politely, but the answer came without hesitation. Thank you. But this is the one thing only I do for him. Vivienne nodded. She also remembered it. 4 o'clock. Lacquered box. Only Hannah touched it. The rest of the household slowly revealed itself. Duyun's younger half-brother, Taemin, rarely joined family meals, preferring to eat alone inside the converted stable that served as his office. Quiet and distant, he always seemed to be carrying thoughts too heavy to share. Ansel checked the estate's security monitors far more often than necessary, lingering on cameras overlooking the East Wing. Meanwhile, every member of the staff adored Hannah. She remembered birthdays, asked after children, and treated everyone with effortless kindness. None of it looked suspicious. Vivienne simply stored each detail away. Old habits were difficult to abandon. Theo called during her first week. His voice brightened the kitchen immediately. He wanted to know whether Korea really had castles, whether the Wi-Fi was good, and when she was coming home. She answered every question except the one she couldn't. Soon. She never mentioned the tremor she'd begun noticing in Do-yoon's hands. A 12-year-old already carried enough. One sleepless night, Vivienne walked through the gardens and noticed a light burning inside Taemin's office long after midnight. From the shadows she watched a delivery driver slip through the side entrance carrying a locked courier case. No signatures. No conversation. Less than 2 minutes later, the man was gone. Another detail. Another unanswered question. Do-yoon, she realized, was watching her too. She never lingered near expensive artwork. Never tried to impress anyone. She simply cooked the careful meals his doctors required, and quietly watched him eat less of them each passing day. On the 9th morning she finally spoke. "You're barely eating." "I've lost my appetite." "They're calling it stress?" He nodded. Vivienne studied the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water. "Stress doesn't usually do that." He looked at her with new curiosity. "You sound very certain for a chef." "I'm not certain," she replied evenly. "I just know when a body tells a different story than the paperwork." That evening she passed his study and saw him holding the afternoon tonic toward the light, examining it with unexpected concentration. For the first time, he seemed to be wondering if she might be right. Behind him, the landscape painting still hung slightly crooked. 9 days had passed. No one had straightened it. Vivienne filed that away too. Some people ignored details. Others survived because they didn't. There was one knife in the estate kitchen Vivienne avoided. It wasn't because of the blade. It was because of the angle her wrist had to bend to use it, the same angle she'd used years earlier in a military field hospital, where every second carried the weight of a life. One afternoon, while filleting fish, the memory caught her off guard. Fluorescent lights. A medic shouting vitals. Her own hands moving faster than thought. Then the moment that never left her. 10 seconds. 10 seconds of uncertainty before making the right diagnosis. The soldier survived. But Vivienne never forgave herself for needing those 10 seconds. The knife slipped. She immediately set it down, pressed both palms against the steel counter, and steadied her breathing. "You do that a lot." She turned. Do-yoon stood quietly in the doorway. "Do what?" "Stop everything and put your hands on something solid." He walked into the kitchen. "I've seen it several times." Vivienne forced a small smile. "Old habit." "No." His voice stayed gentle. "That's not a kitchen habit." He studied her with surprising accuracy. "You move like someone who's done work where mistakes mattered more than dinner." She looked away. "It's not relevant to this job." He smiled faintly. "I don't believe that." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Finally he let the subject go. "Fair enough." Then he surprised her. "Everyone in this house is hiding something." Vivienne decided it was time to ask her own question. "When was your last full blood panel?" He frowned. "Why?" "Because your symptoms don't fit stress." She counted them quietly. Tremors. Loss of appetite. Worsening fatigue. They point toward poisoning. The word lingered between them. Outside, the sea rolled calmly against the cliffs. Inside, neither of them moved. Finally Do-yoon asked, "That's a serious accusation." "I know. I said it anyway." He searched her face, trying to decide whether she was frightened or simply certain. That evening he quietly ordered Ansel to have the tonic tested. The report came back clean. Ansel delivered the results himself. No toxins. Vivienne barely looked up from preparing stock. One sample proves almost nothing. You think it's inconsistent. I think whoever's doing this is patient. She finally met his eyes. They know exactly how much to use. Ansel didn't argue. Over the next 4 days, Vivienne watched even more carefully. Some mornings Duyun looked almost healthy. Others, his hands shook so badly he struggled to lift a glass. She began organizing everything in her head like patient charts. Meals. Sleep. Meetings. Visitors. Symptoms. Then the pattern emerged. The worst mornings always followed evenings when Hannah stayed late. Not every visit. Only some. Which made it harder to notice. But every serious decline came after one of her dinners. And after Duyun drank the tonic she alone prepared. Vivienne refused to jump to conclusions. She'd learned long ago that assumptions could cost lives. So she kept watching. Then, on the 14th day, she found the teacup. It sat forgotten in Duyun's study, a pale residue clinging to the inside well below the normal sediment line. She didn't touch it. Instead, she photographed it from several angles before leaving everything exactly as she'd found it. That night she showed the images to Ansel. He stared at them for a long time. Where was this? His study. After Hannah's visit. Silence. Finally Ansel sighed. I've worked for this family 19 years. He looked at the photo again. I've had a bad feeling about that box for longer than I'd like to admit. He looked back at Vivienne. I know someone who can test this quietly. For the first time since arriving at Bexol, Vivienne realized she wasn't investigating alone anymore. Ansel's contact took 3 days longer than expected. While they waited, Vivienne's attention shifted to Taemin. She didn't like it. Years in the army had taught her that suspicion wasn't evidence. But the late-night courier, the secret meetings, and his growing isolation were becoming difficult to ignore. He had stopped attending gallery walkthroughs. He rarely ate with the family. Twice that week, Vivienne watched him disappear into the estate's old wine cellar, a space now used to store artwork awaiting restoration. Something was happening down there. She intended to find out what. On the 15th night, sleep refused to come. Vivienne slipped quietly into the cellar. Halfway down the stairs she heard voices. Taemin. And another man. The buyer wants confirmation by Friday, the stranger said. If the provenance doesn't hold up, that's your problem. I need more time, Taemin replied. You've had 6 weeks. I'm trying to prove what's happening before someone destroys the evidence. Vivienne stayed perfectly still. A buyer. Forgery. Evidence. None of it sounded good. The stranger disappeared through a hidden side exit. Only then did she turn to leave. Taemin was standing directly behind her. How long have you been listening? His voice was calm. Too calm. Long enough. Silence stretched between them. You don't understand what you heard, he said. Then explain it. I can't. Why not? Because if you tell my brother what you think you heard. He paused. The people I'm investigating will make sure I'm the one who disappears first. Vivienne searched his face. You expect me to believe you're investigating them? I expect you to stay alive. His answer caught her off guard. My brother trusts the wrong people, he continued quietly. I'm trying to prove who they are before they realize I know. Who? Taemin hesitated. For a moment she thought he might finally say the name. Instead he shook his head. Not yet. I've accused the wrong person before. His expression hardened. I won't do it again. Without another word, he climbed the stairs. Vivienne remained alone in the cellar. More confused than before. When she returned upstairs, one detail immediately caught her attention. A light still burned inside Hannah Seo's guest suite. Hours earlier, Hannah had told everyone she was leaving the estate. She hadn't. Vivienne filed away another unanswered question. The following evening, Duyun found her trimming herbs in the greenhouse. He placed a thin folder on the work table. Ansel ran a background check. Vivienne looked at it but didn't open it. You could have asked. I'm asking now. He studied her steadily. 11 years in the U.S. Army. Combat trauma medicine. 2 deployments. You called that field medical experience. She smiled faintly. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the truth either. After a long silence, she finally answered. I came here to cook. I didn't come here to become the person I used to be. What happened? She stared through the greenhouse glass toward the sea. There was a soldier. I had 90 seconds to make a diagnosis. I got it right. He lived. But for 10 of those seconds, I didn't know if I was right. She lowered her eyes. I never stopped hearing those 10 seconds. So I left. I wanted a life where uncertainty only ruined dinner. Duyun listened quietly. When she finished, he spoke almost to himself. That doesn't sound like failure. It sounds like someone who saved a life and punished herself anyway. Vivienne gave a tired smile. Maybe. He closed the folder without reading another page. I need to ask you something. She nodded. Watch me. She frowned. The way you'd watch a patient. Quietly. No reports. No doctors. Just tell me the truth if you see something everyone else misses. His voice had lost its usual reserve. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Vivienne didn't answer immediately. She already knew the truth. She'd been watching him from the day she arrived. Finally, she said, I'll do it. But if I discover what's making you sick, you don't get to ignore it. For the first time since they'd met, Duyun smiled with genuine relief. Agreed. Somewhere in the estate, someone was slowly killing him. And now they would have 2 people looking instead of 1. Ansel's contact finally called on the 17th day. His name was Halden, a former forensic toxicologist who now operated a small independent laboratory near Jeju Port. He specialized in the kind of quiet investigations people couldn't trust official channels to handle. On her afternoon off, Vivienne drove there herself. Officially, she was shopping for groceries. Unofficially, she carried a sealed swab she'd carefully collected from the residue inside Duyun's forgotten teacup. Halden processed the sample while she waited. Neither of them spoke much. Finally, he turned his monitor toward her. Whoever did this knows exactly what they're doing. Vivienne remained silent. The concentration is extremely low, he continued. Too low for a routine toxicology screen to detect unless someone specifically knows what to look for. So it builds over time. He nodded. Exactly. It mimics illness until it's almost too late. Vivienne already knew the answer before she asked. Heavy metal? Yes. I won't identify the exact compound from one sample, but you're looking at deliberate, cumulative poisoning. The words landed with terrible clarity. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Halden looked at her carefully. You should take this to the authorities. I will. She folded the report into her jacket. But not until I know it can't disappear. The drive back to Bexol felt much longer than the drive there. She replayed every conversation. Every symptom. Every meal. Every visitor. Then she rebuilt the timeline one last time. Who prepared the food? Who served it? Who had access? The meals were impossible. Vivienne controlled every ingredient. The household staff never handled the afternoon tonic. The lacquered box arrived sealed. Only one person prepared it. Only one person carried it. Only one person handed it directly to Duyun. Hannah CO. Vivienne gripped the steering wheel tighter. Nothing about Hannah fit the evidence. She was thoughtful, kind, loved by the staff. Exactly the sort of person no one would ever suspect. But evidence didn't care about appearances. It only cared about facts. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Vivienne sat alone in the kitchen. She thought about Theo. About the promise she'd made herself never to step back into another life-or-death fight. Then she remembered Duyun's words in the greenhouse. Asterisk, watch me the way you'd watch a patient. Asterisk, he had trusted her. Now she carried a truth that could destroy his world. But accusing the woman he intended to marry without absolute proof would destroy it anyway. She barely slept. Before sunrise, she met Ansel in the security office. He studied Halden's report in silence. I need to tell Duyun, Vivienne said. Not yet. She looked up sharply. We have laboratory confirmation. We have a timeline. It all points to Hannah. It points, Ansel agreed. But it doesn't prove enough. He leaned forward. If Hannah fights this, the first thing her lawyers will attack won't be the evidence. They'll attack you. Vivienne frowned. You're a foreign employee. A single mother. Working inside the estate. They'll say you're manipulating a wealthy man to make yourself indispensable. She hated how believable it sounded. Ansel continued quietly. Right now you have an accusation. What we need is a case. Vivienne slowly nodded. She had built medical diagnoses exactly the same way. You didn't start with certainty. You gathered enough evidence that no other explanation remained. Then we built it. Together, they listed everything they still needed. Another sample. A documented pattern. A motive. Something impossible to explain away. Later that afternoon, Vivienne entered Duyun's study carrying the tonic tray. For the first time, the lacquered box sat unattended. She didn't touch the drink. Instead, she examined the box itself. Inside, one corner bore a faint scratch. Not ordinary wear. It looked as though someone had opened a hidden compartment. She leaned closer. The study door opened. Looking for something? Hannah's voice was warm. Too warm. Vivienne stood smoothly. Just checking the tray. I like everything arranged properly. Hannah crossed the room and picked up the lacquered box herself. Almost instinctively. She rotated it once in her hands before setting it back down exactly where it had been. Then she smiled. I've heard you've been asking a lot of questions lately. I like understanding the house I work in. Of course. Her smile never changed. But her eyes did. They had become perfectly still. I'd hate for anyone to mistake curiosity for something else. Vivienne met her gaze without blinking. I understand. For several seconds neither woman moved. Each silently measuring the other. Then Hannah walked away. Only after the door closed did Vivienne allow herself a breath. She knew something now that she hadn't known before. Hannah wasn't simply hiding something. She knew someone had started watching her. And from this moment on, every move would become far more dangerous. 2 mornings later, the estate erupted. Security officers moved through the East Wing with clipped efficiency, sealing Taemin's office before breakfast had even ended. Raised voices echoed down the hallway. By the time Vivienne arrived, 2 guards had already boxed his laptop and several files. Taemin stood perfectly still. Not frightened. Stunned. They found a wire transfer with my authorization code, he said quietly as Vivienne reached him. I never sent it. What kind of transfer? Payment to a shell buyer. His jaw tightened. It was time to make it look like I was selling forged artwork instead of investigating who actually was. Vivienne searched his face. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was trying to understand how it had happened. Who could authorize something like that, she asked. The people running this scheme. They know exactly which records matter. They've made me look guilty before I could expose them. His eyes drifted toward the end of the hallway. Vivienne followed his gaze. Hannah stood there, watching. Her expression was composed, sympathetic, almost concerned. To everyone else, she looked like a woman saddened by a family crisis. Only Vivienne noticed that she never looked surprised. "I need to speak to your brother," Vivienne said. "You can't. He's in Seoul meeting the insurers." Taemin gave a bitter laugh. She knew he'd be gone before this happened. Vivienne felt the final piece fall into place. This wasn't an investigation anymore. It was a carefully planned removal. "I believe you," she said. The words surprised him. "They're taking everything," he replied, glancing toward the boxes. "But not everything." He quickly scribbled a phone number onto a receipt. "I kept copies. Off-site. A storage unit near the port. I'll send the address once I'm somewhere safe." Vivienne slipped the paper into her pocket. "Do it quickly. If she's moving this fast, she's almost finished." Taemin nodded. Without resistance, he allowed security to escort him out of the estate. Vivienne watched him disappear through the front gate. The wrong man had just been removed. Across the hallway, Hannah calmly turned and walked back toward the east wing. No celebration. No panic. Only complete control. Vivienne suddenly understood how dangerous their opponent really was. The following evening, Do-yoon returned from Seoul. He looked exhausted. Vivienne met him in the greenhouse with a folder containing everything she'd gathered. Halden's toxicology report. Her symptom timeline. The photographs. And the account of Taemin's removal. Do-yoon read every page in silence. When he finished, he slowly closed the folder. "My brother." He stared through the greenhouse glass. "I spent years believing he was the one hiding things from me." His voice grew quieter. "And all this time." He couldn't bring himself to finish Hannah's name. Vivienne did it for him. "We still need proof that no one can dismiss." He nodded. Taemin said he kept evidence. "If it's real, it changes everything." "And if it isn't?" Vivienne held his gaze. "Then we confront her with what we have." "I'd rather not." Neither of them wanted that version. 2 hours later they drove to a small guest house near the port. Do-yoon insisted on driving himself. Taemin opened the door cautiously. The moment he saw his brother standing beside Vivienne, his guarded expression cracked. "I didn't do it." "I know." Do-yoon answered without hesitation. "And I should have believed you sooner." For the first time in years, the brothers spoke honestly. Taemin laid everything on the table. For 18 months he'd been tracking forged provenance certificates. Authentication approvals had been bypassed. Original paintings quietly replaced. Millions laundered through shell buyers. From a locked case he produced photographs comparing authenticity certificates. To an untrained eye they looked identical. To him, the brushwork proved they had been altered. Then he revealed what he'd been protecting all along. The restoration room. He unfolded old architectural drawings. "There's a hidden storage space behind the east wall. I found it months ago. I didn't have enough evidence to open it. Now they did." That night, the three of them returned to Seoul. Using Ansel's security access, they entered the restoration room unnoticed. Behind what appeared to be a structural wall, Taemin located a concealed release. The panel swung open. Inside were stacks of hidden ledgers. Wrapped paintings. Forgery records. And documents linking several shell companies to a single family name. Do-yoon stared at the papers. Hannah. Beneath her name appeared another. Her father's. A bankrupt art dealer whose debts had nearly destroyed his family years earlier. Taemin exhaled slowly. She's been covering those debts. It doesn't excuse poisoning you. No, Duyun said quietly. It doesn't. Vivienne looked around the hidden room. Forgery. Fraud. Poison. Every mystery now pointed to the same person. All they lacked was the right moment to expose her. They contacted Detective Reyes that same night. Halden had trusted him for years, describing him as one of the few investigators who couldn't be bought or pressured. Reyes listened patiently as Vivienne laid out everything: the toxicology report, the forged certificates, the hidden room, and the evidence linking Hannah's family to the fraud. When she finished, he spoke only once. Don't confront her. Vivienne frowned. We have enough. You have enough to start an investigation, Reyes corrected. Not enough to guarantee a conviction. He closed the folder. Give me 48 hours. 48 hours. Exactly the night of Bexel's annual gala. Vivienne exchanged a look with Duyun. They both understood. The gala would become the battlefield. The chapel glittered beneath crystal chandeliers on the night of the event. Collectors. Board members. Investors. 40 of the gallery's most influential guests drifted among priceless paintings, unaware they were standing inside the center of a criminal investigation. Detective Reyes and his team blended seamlessly into the catering staff. Ansel quietly monitored every entrance. Taemin remained near the exhibition floor, ready to identify forged artwork the moment it became necessary. Vivienne stayed close enough to reach Duyun at a moment's notice. Every detail had been rehearsed. Now they waited. Hannah was flawless. She greeted guests effortlessly, laughed at exactly the right moments, and stood beside Duyun like the devoted fiancée everyone believed her to be. Watching her, Vivienne understood how she had deceived an entire household for months. Nothing about Hannah looked false. That was what made her dangerous. Shortly before 10 o'clock, Duyun stepped onto the podium. He thanked the guests. Spoke briefly about his father's legacy. About preserving art for future generations. Then he lifted his champagne glass. Mid-toast, his hand trembled. The glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered against the stone floor. A heartbeat later, Duyun collapsed. The room froze. Vivienne was already moving. She reached him before anyone else could react, dropping to her knees as years of military training took over. 2 fingers found his pulse. Steady. Weak. She looked toward the crowd. Call an ambulance. Nobody moved. Her voice sharpened. Now. And tell them it's thallium poisoning. Silence crashed over the room. Every guest heard the word. Every guest looked toward Hannah. Hannah remained frozen. She never asked what had happened. She never questioned the diagnosis. She simply stared. Vivienne noticed. So did Duyun. Barely conscious, he gripped Vivienne's wrist and forced himself upright just enough to look across the room. She's the only person here. His voice was weak but unmistakably clear. Who isn't asking what's wrong with me? He held Hannah's eyes. Because she already knows. No one spoke. The accusation settled over the room like stone. Then Detective Reyes stepped forward. Gone was the catering uniform. In its place stood a police detective. Hannah CO, he said calmly. We're opening a formal investigation into fraud, forgery, financial crimes, and attempted murder. At the same moment, Taemin crossed the room carrying the forged authentication records. He spread the documents across a nearby table. Every certificate here has been altered. He looked directly at the board. And I can prove every one of them. Something inside Hannah finally broke. Not dramatically. Quietly. Completely. Tears filled her eyes. My father left debts. Her voice trembled. I was trying to save my family. You poisoned him, Vivienne answered softly. Every dose. Every day. That wasn't survival. That was a choice. The paramedics arrived minutes later. Do-yoon was conscious. Stable. Still insisting he could walk on his own. Vivienne ignored him and helped the medical team load him onto the stretcher. As they reached the ambulance, he caught her hand. "You were always going to tell me." She looked at him. The truth. About all of it. Her military past. The poisoning. Everything she'd been carrying alone. Vivienne smiled for the first time that night. I was just waiting for the right moment. Do-yoon squeezed her hand gently. I think this was it. As the ambulance doors closed, Vivienne watched the flashing lights pull away. 18 days earlier, she'd arrived at Bexel believing she had left her old life behind. Instead, it had found her again. Do-yoon remained in the hospital for 4 days. His doctors said he could have left sooner, but the board insisted he stay until every trace of the poison had cleared from his system. For the first time in weeks, his condition improved instead of declined. Each afternoon Vivienne visited after finishing her kitchen shift, bringing meals the hospital approved but preparing them herself. Day by day, the color returned to his face. So did his strength. Outside the hospital, the story spread quickly. The public never learned every detail, but they learned enough. The headlines weren't about a billionaire heir. They were about a private chef whose quiet observations had uncovered a forgery ring and an attempted murder. Reporters camped outside the estate. Vivienne declined every interview. She hadn't come to Korea looking for recognition. She wasn't about to start now. Detective Rhea's investigation moved quickly. The hidden ledgers, forged certificates, financial records, and toxicology reports left little room for argument. Hannah Seo was formally charged with fraud, forgery, financial conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. During questioning, the truth finally emerged. Her father's failed art business had left enormous debts. She had convinced herself that replacing paintings, laundering sales, and slowly eliminating Do-yoon would secure the gallery before everything collapsed around her. It explained her motives. It didn't excuse her choices. Taemin was cleared of every accusation. The board publicly apologized and restored his position as head of authentication. The apology mattered far less than something else. For the first time in years, the two brothers began rebuilding the trust they had nearly lost forever. Vivienne watched from a respectful distance. Some wounds belonged to family alone. 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, Do-yoon invited Vivienne to the greenhouse. The afternoon light looked exactly as it had the day they first spoke honestly. I have an offer. She smiled. I guessed. He slid a contract across the table. Head of Household Security. Medical advisor. Whatever title you prefer. The salary is more than generous. Vivienne didn't even open it. I can't. He looked surprised. I left the army because I didn't want every day of my life to belong to someone else's emergency. She smiled softly. Theo needs his mother more than anyone else needs a guardian. Do-yoon nodded slowly. He understood. Instead they agreed on something smaller. A consulting role. Just enough for her to help when needed, without losing the life she'd fought to rebuild. Before she left, Do-yoon asked one final question. Why did you stay that night? You could have handed everything to Detective Reyes and walked away. Vivienne thought about it. You were eating my food. He laughed quietly. So? So once someone trusts me to feed them, their safety becomes my responsibility. He held her gaze. Is that all I became? The question lingered between them. Vivienne smiled. Ask me again. After life becomes ordinary. He accepted the answer. Some things deserve time. 6 months later, Bexel Gallery reopened. Every painting had been authenticated again. Every procedure rewritten. Every hidden weakness repaired. Theo spent the summer on Jeju. Under Taemin's patient guidance, He learned to spot forged paintings almost as quickly as the experts. Watching him laugh inside a place that had once been filled with secrets, Vivienne realized how completely life had changed. One quiet Saturday, Duyun called. Not through the estate. Not through assistance. Just as himself. Would you drive with me? Where? I don't know. She smiled. That sounds like a destination. An hour later they were driving along the Jeju coastline in Vivienne's old car, windows down, the sea stretching endlessly beside them. No investigations. No poison. No lies. Just two people who had survived the same storm, finally moving toward whatever came next. If this story reminded you that the quietest person in the room is sometimes the only one paying attention, like, share, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and I promise you haven't seen where it goes. See you on the next one.